The glass-walled office on the 45th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper offered a sweeping view of the city. But Lucas Reynolds barely noticed it anymore. He sat at his desk, his perfectly tailored suit contrasting with his disheveled dark hair, a rare sign of stress in his otherwise meticulously maintained appearance. The phone call he'd just received from his attorney had shattered his carefully constructed world. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. 30 days, Mr. Reynolds, the lawyer had said, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. Your grandfather's terms are non-negotiable. Either you marry before your 30th birthday, or you lose control of Reynolds Enterprises. Everything you've worked for will go to the board of trustees. Lucas loosened his tie and poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on his desk. The amber liquid didn't calm his nerves as it usually did. The ultimatum felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Marriage had never been part of his 5-year plan. Relationships were messy, complicated, and inevitably ended in disappointment. He'd learned that lesson watching his parents' marriage implode. Across the city, in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, Ana Martinez counted the bills on her kitchen table for the 3rd time. The stack remained stubbornly inadequate. Her mother's medical bills had piled up, and their landlord's patience was wearing thin. The morning light filtering through the worn curtains cast shadows over past due notices and final warnings. Please, Ana said, running her fingers through her dark curls in frustration. Let me take an extra shift at the hotel. I can handle it. Her mother, Elena, sat across from her, worry lines deepening around her eyes. You're already working yourself to exhaustion, mi amor. There has to be another way. Ana glanced at her cleaning uniform hanging by the door. Her job as a housekeeper at one of Manhattan's luxury hotels paid decent money, but it wasn't enough. Not with her mother's condition worsening and the medical bills mounting. She'd already pawned her grandmother's jewelry and picked up weekend shifts at a local diner. Meanwhile, Lucas found himself in an unfamiliar position. Desperate, his usual network of connections and influence couldn't help him with this problem. He needed a wife, but not a real one. Someone who would play the part without getting emotionally invested. Someone who understood that this was strictly business. The advertisement appeared on his computer screen after hours of searching. Discrete solutions for complex social requirements. The agency's website was professional, understated, and promised exactly what he needed. A contractual arrangement that would satisfy his grandfather's demands without compromising his independence. The initial consultation was brief and efficient. The agency representative, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper business sense, listened to his requirements without judgment. We have several candidates who might suit your needs, Mr. Reynolds. However, given the time constraint and the high-profile nature of your situation, I recommend someone who hasn't been in our usual circuit. Someone fresh, authentic. It will make the story more believable. Lucas reviewed the file they sent him. Ana Martinez, 26, no criminal record, no social media presence, no complicated family entanglements, except for a sick mother. Perfect. He authorized the initial contact without reading further. What he needed was a signature on a contract, not a life story. What Lucas didn't know was that his decision would set in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his family, and the empire he was so desperate to protect. The contract he was about to propose would be more binding than he could imagine, not because of its legal terms, but because of the unwritten consequences it would trigger. The cafe Lucas chose for their first meeting sat on the corner of 5th Avenue, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a perfect view of Central Park. He arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a private table in the back where he could observe without being observed. His Patek Philippe watch marked each minute with precise clicks, matching his tapping finger on the marble tabletop. Ana entered exactly on time, and Lucas's first thought was that she looked nothing like her file photo. The agency had sent him a grainy DMV picture that didn't capture the quiet dignity in her posture, or the watchful intelligence in her dark eyes. She wore a simple blue dress, probably her best outfit. He noted with a businessman's eye for detail, and carried herself with an unexpected grace that made several patrons turn to look. She spotted him immediately. Of course she did. He'd sent her his photo, and he knew he was distinctive enough in his custom Tom Ford suit. What he didn't expect was the slight lift of her eyebrow, an almost imperceptible gesture that somehow made him feel like he was the one being evaluated. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, professional. No nervous trembling, no excessive eagerness. "Thank you for meeting with me." Lucas gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. Would you like something to drink? They make excellent cappuccinos here." "Just water, thank you." She settled into the chair, placing her worn leather bag beside her. The contrast between her belongings and the cafe's opulent setting was stark, but she showed no sign of discomfort. The waiter appeared and disappeared with their orders. Lucas leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "I assume the agency explained the basics of what I'm looking for." They did. Aina's voice matched his in volume, but carried a note of skepticism. "A one-year contract marriage to satisfy your grandfather's inheritance requirements. No romantic involvement, no public scandal, and complete discretion." Lucas nodded, impressed by her directness. The financial compensation would be substantial, enough to cover any medical expenses your mother might have, plus a comfortable living allowance. Something flickered in Aina's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that he knew about her mother, but she recovered quickly. "And what exactly would my duties entail, beyond signing a marriage certificate?" "Attendance at key social events, family gatherings, corporate functions. You'd need to learn enough about my world to pass as my wife convincingly. The story would be that we've been dating quietly for months, away from public scrutiny." Anna took a sip of her water, studying him over the rim of the glass. "And you think people will believe that? That a wealthy businessman suddenly married his secret girlfriend, who happens to be a hotel housekeeper?" The question caught Lucas off guard. Most candidates from the agency simply nodded and asked about the money. "Love makes people do unexpected things," he said, trying to sound confident. "The media loves a Cinderella story." "Is that what this is?" Anna's voice carried a hint of challenge. "A Cinderella story. This is a business arrangement," Lucas corrected firmly. "Nothing more. The money would be placed in an escrow account, guaranteed regardless of how the year plays out. You'd have full medical insurance, a clothing allowance, and access to necessary resources to maintain appearances." Anna fell silent, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of her water glass. The silence stretched until Lucas found himself fighting the urge to fill it with more promises, more explanations. Finally, she looked up. "I have conditions of my own." Lucas blinked. In all his scenarios, he hadn't anticipated this. Such as, "I keep my job at the hotel, under a different name if necessary. I won't be financially dependent on this arrangement. And I want to be involved in deciding how we present our story. If I'm going to lie, I want the lies to be believable." The determination in her voice stirred something in Lucas. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. This wasn't the desperate woman he'd expected to manipulate easily. She was negotiating, and doing it well. "Those terms are acceptable," he heard himself say. "Shall we discuss the details?" Anna nodded, but as she reached for her bag to take out a notebook, Lucas caught that same glimmer of something in her eyes. Intelligence, determination, and something else he couldn't quite identify. It made him wonder, just for a moment, if he was the one being maneuvered into something he didn't fully understand. The transformation of Anna Martinez into Mrs. Reynolds began with a visit to Bergdorf Goodman. Lucas's personal shopper, a rail-thin woman named Margot, circled Aina like a fashion-conscious vulture, muttering about measurements and seasonal colors. Aina stood still, her face neutral, as dresses worth more than her yearly salary were draped across her shoulders. "The Valentino makes a statement," Margot declared, holding up a red gown, "but perhaps too bold for her first appearance. We need to establish credibility, not draw unnecessary attention." Lucas watched from his leather armchair, noting how Anna's shoulders tensed at each casual display of wealth. She selected simpler pieces than Margot suggested, showing an instinct for understated elegance that surprised him. When she emerged in a midnight blue Carolina Herrera gown, even Margot fell silent. Their first public appearance came 3 weeks later at the annual Reynolds Enterprise Charity Gala. Anna descended the grand staircase of the Plaza Hotel with practiced grace, the result of hours of coaching from an etiquette consultant. Lucas offered his arm, feeling the slight tremor in her hand as she took it. "Remember," he whispered, "you've known me for 8 months. We met through mutual friends at the Metropolitan Museum fundraiser." "I know our story, Lucas," she replied, her smile perfect but her grip tightening on his arm. "I helped write it, remember?" The ballroom buzzed with New York's elite. Old money pearls clutched by manicured hands, new money diamonds flashing under crystal chandeliers. Lucas guided Anna through the crowd, performing the expected introductions. She played her part flawlessly, dropping carefully crafted personal details into conversation, laughing at the right moments. But he noticed the looks, the whispered conversations behind champagne flutes, the way certain women, those who had previously shown interest in becoming Mrs. Reynolds themselves, grouped together, their eyes following Anna's every move. So, Anna, Victoria Ashworth, a board member's wife, cornered them by the bar. "Lucas tells us you met at the Met fundraiser, but I don't recall seeing you there. I never forget a face, you know." Anna took a sip of champagne before answering. "I was rather focused on the Egyptian exhibition that evening. Art history was my passion before I moved into corporate consulting." Lucas watched the exchange, admiring how Anna wove their fabricated backstory into natural conversation. They'd spent hours developing her fictional consulting career, something prestigious enough to explain her presence in their world, but vague enough to avoid detailed questions. The music changed to a waltz. Lucas pulled Anna onto the dance floor, partly to escape Victoria's probing questions, partly because their story required it. He hadn't expected Anna to actually know how to waltz. "My mother taught me," she explained, reading his surprise. "She used to work in places like this, remember?" She thought it was important to know these things. As they moved across the floor, Lucas became aware of how naturally they fit together. Anna's body responded to his lead instinctively, as if they'd danced together for years instead of practicing for just a few weeks. The scent of her perfume, Chanel, selected by Margot, mixed with something uniquely her own. "Everyone's watching us," Anna murmured. "Let them watch," Lucas replied. "They're supposed to believe we're in love, and what are we supposed to believe?" The question hung between them as they continued to dance. Lucas found himself studying her face, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the curve of her lips as she counted steps under her breath. He'd selected her because she seemed simple, uncomplicated. Now he was beginning to suspect that nothing about Anna Martinez was simple. The weeks that followed brought more events, more performances. Anna proved to be a quick study, absorbing the complex social codes of Lucas's world while maintaining her own quiet dignity. She never fully relaxed at these functions, but her tension wasn't obvious to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Anyone who wasn't watching her as closely as Lucas found himself doing. What troubled him wasn't how well she played her role. It was how often he caught himself forgetting it was a role at all. How natural it felt to reach for her hand, to lean in close when she spoke, to watch her face light up when she smiled at something genuine instead of practiced. The company's stock price rose as news of Lucas's marriage stabilized investor confidence. His grandfather seemed pleased, though he watched Anna with an unnervingly intense interest at family gatherings. Everything was going according to plan. But plans, Lucas was beginning to learn, had a way of developing complications he hadn't anticipated. Complications like the way his chest tightened when Aina wasn't beside him, or how he found himself inventing reasons to extend their time together beyond what the contract required. The first sign of trouble came in the form of missing quarterly reports. Lucas sat in his office late one night, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, staring at his computer screen. Financial data that should have been readily available had vanished from the company's secure servers. Not deleted, that would have left a trace, but systematically altered in ways that only someone intimately familiar with Reynolds Enterprises' operations could manage. Anna found him there at midnight, having returned to the penthouse and noticed his absence. She'd kept her promise about maintaining her hotel job, working early morning shifts that left her afternoons and evenings free for their charade. Now she stood in his office doorway, still wearing the simple black dress from a board member's dinner party earlier that evening. "You missed the call with Tokyo," she said, setting a cup of coffee on his desk. Not his usual expensive blend, but the kind she brought from home, strong, dark, and somehow more real. "Someone's been tampering with our financial records." Lucas pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. "The numbers don't match what I reviewed last week. Key projections have been altered." "If I hadn't memorized the original data," Anna moved behind him, looking at the screens. Her perfume still Chanel, but now mixed with the scent of coffee and late-night exhaustion, made it hard for him to focus. "Show me," she said. Lucas blinked. "This is confidential company information. I'm your wife, remember?" Her voice carried a hint of irony, at least on paper. "And before I cleaned hotel rooms, I did bookkeeping for a small import business. Numbers don't lie, even if people do." Reluctantly, Lucas pulled up the files. Anna leaned over his shoulder, her hair brushing against his neck as she studied the screen. Her questions were sharp, focused. She spotted patterns he'd missed, inconsistencies that his finance team had overlooked. "These changes," she said, pointing to a particular set of figures, "they're subtle. Someone's trying to make the company appear slightly less profitable than it is. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to affect stock prices over time." Lucas stared at her. "How did you, when you clean rich people's hotel rooms, you learn to pay attention to details?" She straightened up, meeting his gaze. "And when you grow up poor, you learn how money really works." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a new routine. During the day, they maintained their public appearances. The happy couple, the successful businessman and his devoted wife. But at night, they became investigators, poring over financial records, tracking patterns, building a case. Anna's perspective proved invaluable. She noticed things his privileged background had blind spots for, the way certain transactions were timed to avoid scrutiny, how funds were moved through seemingly legitimate channels that actually masked their true destination. "Your cousin James," she said one night, after a particularly intensive research session. "He's been present at every board meeting where these altered reports were presented." Lucas frowned. James had always been the family golden boy, their grandfather's favorite, despite Lucas's superior business acumen. "He doesn't have access to these systems, but his assistant does." Anna pulled up an employee directory. Sarah Chen. She worked in IT before James hired her. The investigation drew them closer, creating a different kind of intimacy than their public performances. Lucas found himself watching Anna as she worked. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how her fingers moved across keyboard with surprising speed, the sharp intelligence in her eyes as she connected dots others had missed. But as they dug deeper, the stakes grew higher. Anonymous warnings appeared in Lucas's email, a minor car accident that seemed less accidental in retrospect, strange calls to Anna's mother, hanging up when answered. "We should stop," Lucas said one evening, after learning that Anna's mother had received another threatening call. "This isn't what you signed up for." Anna looked up from her notes, her face set with determination. "Actually, I signed up to help you keep your company. That's exactly what I'm doing." The contract was for a marriage of convenience, not corporate espionage. Is that really all this is now? She held his gaze, challenging him to answer the real question beneath her words. Before Lucas could respond, his computer chimed. A new email had arrived, containing company documents he'd never seen before, suggesting a conspiracy that went far deeper than missing financial reports. As he read, his face paled. Anna moved to his side. What is it? He turned the screen so she could see, not realizing that this action would set in motion events that would change everything, not just for his company, but for both their lives. Anna stared at the documents on Lucas's screen, her hand instinctively gripping his shoulder. The emails detailed conversations from 15 years ago, conversations about a former housekeeper at the Reynolds mansion and her sudden departure. The housekeeper's name made Anna's breath catch. Alina Martinez. That's... Anna's voice trailed off. Your mother, Lucas finished, his throat tight. She worked for my family. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. Anna pulled away from him, pacing the office with sharp, agitated steps. She never told me. All those times she mentioned working in wealthy homes, she never once said it was your family. Lucas scrolled through more emails, each one adding layers to a story he'd never known. According to these, she was more than just a housekeeper. She was my grandfather's personal assistant, handled confidential documents, attended private meetings, until she suddenly left. Anna stopped pacing, her face a mask of controlled emotion. I was 11. I remember because that's when we moved to the smaller apartment, when she started working multiple jobs instead of one good one. She never explained why. Lucas leaned back in his chair, running calculations in his head. That would have been right after my grandmother died. Grandfather was different after that. He became obsessed with the company, with legacy. Legacy. Anna repeated the word like it tasted bitter. She used to say that word. Late at night, when she thought I was sleeping, she'd talk about legacy and birthright and things that didn't make sense to a child. The penthouse windows reflected their images. Lucas in his expensive suit, Anna in her simple dress, both caught in a moment of understanding that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew. Outside, New York's lights sparkled indifferently to their personal drama. There's more, Lucas said, opening another document. Financial transfers, large ones, made to an offshore account around the time your mother left. Monthly payments that continued for years until suddenly stopping. Anna moved back to the desk, her fingers hovering over the screen. Hush money, or support payments. Lucas's voice was carefully neutral, the kind a wealthy man might make to ensure the comfort of someone he cared about, until something made him stop caring. Anna's words carried years of accumulated hurt. Until we started struggling, until my mother had to clean other people's homes again, until she got sick and couldn't afford proper treatment. Lucas watched her face, seeing the pieces fall into place in her mind. He'd learned to read her expressions over their months together, the slight tightening around her eyes when she was processing difficult information, the way her jaw set when she reached a conclusion she didn't like. The agency, she said suddenly, the one that arranged our marriage. It wasn't random, was it? Someone made sure I was the one you chose. Lucas pulled up the agency's file on Anna. Looking at it now, the coincidences seemed too perfect. A candidate with no social media presence, no complicated family ties except a sick mother, someone who could believably play the role of a wealthy man's wife, despite her background. Someone wanted us together, he agreed. But why? Anna's laugh held no humor. Maybe to keep me close, maybe to watch me, or maybe, she trailed off, unwilling to voice the possibility that hung between them. Lucas stood, moving to stand beside her at the window. Their reflections overlapped in the glass, his height and her grace, his power and her strength, their shared uncertainty about what came next. We need to talk to your mother, he said finally, and my grandfather, separately. If there's a connection here, If there's something they've been hiding all these years, it could change everything. Anna turned to face him, her eyes searching his. The company, the inheritance, this marriage. Are you ready for that? Lucas asked, realizing how much the answer mattered to him for reasons that had nothing to do with business. Anna's response was interrupted by his phone buzzing, a message from his grandfather requesting an urgent meeting. When Lucas looked up from the screen, he saw something in Anna's expression that mirrored his own growing suspicion. They were no longer just playing roles in someone else's game. They had become central players in a story that had begun long before their arranged marriage. The Reynolds Enterprises boardroom felt colder than usual. Lucas sat at one end of the long mahogany table, James at the other, with various board members arranged between them like chess pieces. The quarterly review meeting had devolved into barely concealed hostility. "These accusations are ridiculous," James said, his perfectly pressed suit failing to hide his agitation. "You're seeing conspiracies where there are only normal business fluctuations." Lucas slid several documents across the table. Normal fluctuations don't systematically undervalue company assets. Normal fluctuations don't redirect funds through shell companies that coincidentally list your assistant as a director. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. James's face flushed red. "At least I'm not the one who married his housekeeper to keep his inheritance." The room fell silent. Lucas felt his hands clench under the table, but kept his voice steady. "My wife's background is irrelevant to this discussion." "Is it?" James leaned forward, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Because I find it interesting that you chose her, of all people. Did you know who she was when you arranged your little marriage of convenience?" Before Lucas could respond, the boardroom door opened. Anna stood there, elegant in a tailored navy suit, holding a leather portfolio. Several board members straightened in their seats. Over the past months, they'd learned to pay attention when she entered a room. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, walking to Lucas's side, "but I thought the board might be interested in these." She opened the portfolio, removing a stack of documents. Complete records of every altered transaction, every manipulated report, and every shell company created in the past 5 years, including the ones we haven't discussed yet. James's smile faltered. "You can't prove." "Actually, we can." Anna's voice carried the same quiet authority she'd used when negotiating their marriage contract. "Your assistant was very thorough in her record keeping. Apparently, she believed in having insurance against future complications." The implications hung in the air. Board members began reaching for the documents, murmuring among themselves. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a setup. She's trying to steal the company. Don't you see? She's not who you think she is." "No," Lucas agreed, standing as well. "She's more than I thought she was. More than any of us thought she was." James moved suddenly, grabbing his briefcase and heading for the door. "This meeting is over. My lawyers will be in touch." After he left, the board members filed out one by one, taking copies of Anna's documents with them. Soon, only Lucas and Anna remained in the boardroom, the city skyline stretching behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows. "That was dangerous," Lucas said quietly. "He'll retaliate." Anna set her portfolio down, her hands trembling slightly, now that the performance was over. "He already has. Someone broke into my mother's apartment this morning." Lucas turned sharply. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Nothing was taken. It was a warning." She met his eyes. "But they didn't find what they were looking for, which is letters. From your grandfather to my mother. She kept them all these years, hidden in a safety deposit box." Anna's voice caught slightly. "I got them this morning, after the break-in. Lucas, you need to read them." Before she could continue, Lucas's phone buzzed with a text message. His face paled as he read it. "James just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's moving to have me removed as CEO. Can he do that? With enough support? Yes. And he's had years to build alliances, while I focused on running the company. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. If he succeeds, I lose everything. Not just the inheritance, but my position, my authority to investigate what he's been doing. Anna moved closer, placing her hand over his. The gesture felt natural now, comfortable in a way that had nothing to do with their contract. You're not going to lose anything. How can you be so sure? Because, she said, her voice carrying a weight he hadn't heard before, I finally understand why your grandfather insisted on this marriage. Why it had to be me. And after you read these letters, you'll understand too. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew an aged envelope. The paper yellowed with time. Lucas recognized his grandfather's handwriting immediately. The date on the letter was exactly 9 months before Anna was born. The letters sat unopened on Lucas's coffee table, while rain pelted against the penthouse windows. Neither he nor Anna had moved to read them in the past hour. Instead, they sat in uncharacteristic silence, the weight of potential revelations keeping them still. We should order food, Anna said finally, breaking the tension. We can't face life-changing discoveries on empty stomachs. Lucas found himself laughing despite everything. It was such an Anna thing to say. Practical, direct, yet somehow making the impossible feel manageable. Chinese from that place in Brooklyn you like. You remember my order. Kung Pao chicken, extra spicy, no peanuts. He was already dialing. You've ordered it every time we've worked late for the past 3 months. When the food arrived, they spread it out on the living room floor, ignoring the expensive dining table. Anna had kicked off her heels, her stockinged feet tucked under her as she picked at her noodles. Lucas had shed his suit jacket and tie, sleeves rolled up, looking more like a grad student than a CEO fighting for his company. Tell me something real, Anna said suddenly. Something that's not in our script, not part of the story we tell everyone else. Lucas considered this while picking up a dumpling with his chopsticks. I hate sailing. Everyone in my social circle has boats, goes to regattas, talks about wind patterns. I get seasick and pretend it's because I'm too busy with work. Anna smiled, a genuine one that reached her eyes. I already knew that. You turned green when we went to the Hamptons yacht party. You never said anything. I was too busy holding your water bottle and making excuses to the host about urgent business calls. She took a bite of chicken. Your turn to ask me something real. Why did you really take this job? The truth. Anna set down her chopsticks, her expression growing serious. Because when I saw your picture in the agency's file, you looked as trapped as I felt. Different cage, same desperation. The honesty of her answer caught him off guard. They'd spent months pretending, playing roles, maintaining careful distances. Now, sitting on his floor eating Chinese food, those pretenses felt paper-thin. I stopped acting weeks ago, Lucas admitted quietly. When we dance at events, when I hold your hand at dinner parties, when I look at you across rooms. None of that's been pretend for a while now. Anna's breath caught. That's dangerous. More dangerous than corporate espionage, than whatever's in those letters. Yes, she met his eyes. Because those things can only take away your company. This could break both of us. The rain continued outside, creating a private world in the penthouse. Lucas found himself remembering small moments. Anna teaching him to make proper coffee, him showing her his favorite hidden spots in Central Park, both of them laughing at terrible movies after long days of investigation. Tell me another truth, he said. Anna looked down at her hands. I'm terrified to read those letters, not because of what they might mean for the company, but because they might change how you look at me. Lucas moved closer, his hand finding hers. One more truth then. How I look at you has nothing to do with companies or inheritance or whatever secrets those letters hold. She turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. Promise. Instead of answering, Lucas leaned forward and kissed her. Not the careful public kisses they'd shared at events, but something real, tender and terrified and true. Anna responded with equal honesty, her free hand coming up to cup his face. When they finally pulled apart, Anna pressed her forehead against his. That wasn't in the contract. Sue me, Lucas murmured, making her laugh. The letters still waited on the coffee table, their secrets patient. The company still hung in the balance. Tomorrow would bring board meetings and revelations and consequences. But for now, in the rain-softened evening, they allowed themselves this moment of simple truth, until Lucas's phone buzzed with an urgent message, shattering their bubble of peace. The screen displayed a single line from his grandfather. "It's time you both knew everything. Come to the house, now." The Reynolds mansion loomed against the night sky, its limestone facade made ghostly by security lighting. Lucas's grandfather, Edward Reynolds, waited for them in his study, a room that hadn't changed in 30 years. The same leather chairs, the same oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, the same heavy desk where he'd built and destroyed fortunes. "You've read the letters?" Edward asked as they entered, his voice rougher than usual. "Not yet," Lucas answered, feeling Anna tense beside him. "We came as soon as we got your message." Edward nodded, seeming both relieved and troubled. He looked older than Lucas remembered, more vulnerable in his silk dressing gown than in his usual business suits. Perhaps that's better. Some things should be heard, not read. He gestured for them to sit, but remained standing himself, moving to the window that overlooked the garden. "James came to see me today. He was quite agitated about your investigation, about the documents Aina presented to the board." "He's been stealing from the company," Lucas started, but Edward raised a hand. "James has always been foolish with money and power. Like his father, my late brother, he believes wealth is his birthright rather than his responsibility." Edward turned to face them. "But that's not why I called you here." Anna sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Lucas recognized her pose, the same one she adopted when facing difficult situations, gathering her strength. "Alina," Edward said softly, looking at Anna, "your mother, she was more than my assistant." "I know," Anna replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The letters would have told us that, wouldn't they?" Edward moved to his desk, opening a drawer to remove a photograph. He handed it to Anna. The image showed a younger Alina, beautiful in a simple blue dress, standing in these same gardens. She was laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. "I loved her," Edward said simply. "After my wife died, Alina was the only person who saw me as a man, not a fortune. She reminded me how to laugh, how to live beyond boardrooms and balance sheets." Lucas watched Anna study the photograph, saw the mix of emotions cross her face. "Why did she leave?" she asked. "Because I was a coward." Edward's admission filled the room. The board, the family, our social circle, they would never have accepted her. "I told myself I was protecting her, protecting both of you, by sending her away with enough money to live comfortably. But I was really protecting myself, my position, my reputation. Both of us." Lucas interrupted, the implications hitting him. "Anna is my daughter," Edward finished. "Your cousin, Lucas, though perhaps half-cousin, is more accurate, given that your father was my stepson." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Lucas felt the room tilt, his carefully constructed world shifting on its axis. Aina's grip on the photograph tightened, its edges crinkling. "You knew," she said, not a question. "When Lucas chose me from the agency, when this marriage was arranged, you orchestrated all of it." Edward nodded. "I'm dying, children, cancer, 6 months, maybe less. I needed to make things right, but I also needed to know if you were worthy of the legacy I'm leaving behind. So you tested us," Lucas said bitterly. "Watched us investigate the company, fight James's corruption, fall in." He stopped, glancing at Anna. "Fall in love," Edward smiled sadly. "Yes. I needed to know if you could see past backgrounds and bank accounts to recognize what truly matters. Your grandmother taught me that lesson too late. I couldn't bear to see either of you repeat my mistakes." Anna stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Does my mother know you planned this?" "No, she never told you about me, because I asked her not to, as part of our arrangement." Another cowardly act I need to make right. Edward sank into his chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. Tomorrow, I'm calling a board meeting. Before James can make his move, I'm going to tell them everything. Acknowledge you publicly as my daughter, Anna, and name you both as my true heirs. It will cause a scandal, Lucas warned. Good. Edward's voice regained some of its old strength. Let them gossip. Let them judge. I've spent too many years caring about the wrong things, hurting the people I should have protected. He looked between them, these two people he'd manipulated into finding each other. The question is, what will you do with this truth? Your marriage may have been arranged, but what it's become, that's real. I've watched you both closely enough to know that. Anna turned from the window, meeting Lucas's gaze across the room. In that look passed 1,000 unspoken words, 100 shared moments, dozens of small truths they'd discovered about each other. We need time, she said finally, to process this, to decide what we want beyond what you've planned for us. Edward nodded. Time is one thing I can't give you much of. The board meets at 9 tomorrow morning. Whatever you decide, know that I am truly sorry for the years of pain my choices caused. As they left the study, Lucas and Anna carried more than revelations. They carried the weight of decisions that would affect not just their lives, but the lives of everyone connected to Reynolds Enterprises. The truth had been revealed, but its consequences were still unfolding. The drive back to Manhattan passed in heavy silence. Rain still fell, turning the city lights into watercolor smears across the windshield. Lucas gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white. Anna stared out the passenger window, the photograph from Edward's study clutched in her lap. They ended up at Anna's apartment in Brooklyn, not the penthouse. Something about this moment demanded honesty, and nowhere felt more honest than her small living room with its worn furniture and family photos. Tea, Anna offered, falling back on routine to manage the chaos of emotions. Something stronger. She pulled out a bottle of cheap whiskey from a kitchen cabinet. Not your usual single malt. Perfect. Lucas accepted the glass, noticing how their fingers brushed during the exchange. Such a small touch, yet now loaded with new meaning. How are you? Anna laughed. But it wasn't a happy sound. How am I? I just found out I'm the illegitimate daughter of one of New York's wealthiest men. My entire marriage is part of his elaborate redemption plan, and tomorrow morning the world gets to know all about it. I'm fantastic. She dropped onto her couch, tucking her feet under her, a gesture so familiar to Lucas now that his chest ached. The crazy thing is, she continued, I'm not even angry at him. I'm angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. All those coincidences, the way things fell into place. We saw what we wanted to see, Lucas said quietly. I wanted a simple solution to keep my position. You wanted to help your mother. We didn't look deeper because we were afraid of what we'd find. And now, Lucas set down his glass, turning to face her fully. Now, I have to decide whether to support Edward's announcement tomorrow or fight it. Whether to accept you as a co-heir or challenge the succession. What happened to how I look at you has nothing to do with companies or inheritance. Anna's voice carried a hint of steel beneath the vulnerability. That was before I knew you were my cousin. Half-cousin, she corrected, then laughed again, this time with genuine humor. God, listen to us. Debating genealogy like characters in a bad soap opera. Lucas found himself smiling despite everything. It was so typically Anna, cutting through pretense to the absurd heart of things. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. I spent my whole life, he said slowly, believing that Reynolds Enterprises was my birthright, that running the company was my destiny. Every decision I made, every relationship I sacrificed, every compromise, it was all for the company. And now I realize I've never been happier than these past months. Investigating corruption with you, eating takeout on the floor, watching you challenge board members with that quiet strength of yours. He squeezed her hand. The company isn't my destiny. It's just a company. Anna studied his face in the dim light. What are you saying, Lucas? I'm saying let Edward make his announcement. Let the world know you're his daughter. You deserve your birthright as much as I do. More, probably, given how hard you've worked while starting with nothing. He took a deep breath. And I'm saying I want to fight James together, run the company together, build something new together. As cousins, Anna's voice was barely a whisper. As partners, in every way. Lucas moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. Unless you'd rather have the company all to yourself, you're certainly capable of running it alone. Anna leaned into his touch. I never wanted the company. I just wanted... She stopped, vulnerability flickering across her features. What did you want? You, she admitted. The real you, not the role you were playing. Even before tonight, even knowing it was impossible, even thinking I was just the hired help, I wanted you. Lucas kissed her then, pouring months of pretense and revelation and newfound truth into the contact. Anna responded with equal fervor, her fingers curling into his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. So we're doing this, facing tomorrow together. Together, Anna agreed. But Lucas, when the press finds out about all of this, you're handling the interviews. I've had enough drama for one lifetime. His laughter was interrupted by both their phones buzzing simultaneously. Messages from Edward. Board meeting moved up. James, making his move early. Be at the office by 7 a.m. Dawn was only a few hours away, and with it would come the moment that would change everything. Again. The Reynolds Enterprises lobby buzzed with unusual activity for 6:45 a.m. News vans lined the street outside. Reporters already gathering like vultures, sensing a story. Lucas and Anna arrived together, their united front drawing curious stares from early morning employees. James waited by the boardroom doors, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. Cousin, he sneered at Lucas, then turned to Anna with a twisted smile. Or should I say, cousins? Save the theatrics, James, Lucas replied, steering Anna past him. The board will hear the full story soon enough. Inside, Edward Reynolds already sat at the head of the table, looking frail but determined in his charcoal suit. Board members filed in, many clutching coffee cups and wearing expressions of confused irritation at the early hour. Anna's mother, Alina, sat quietly in a corner, her presence causing a ripple of whispers. James took his position, spreading documents before him with theatrical flair. I've called this emergency meeting because I've uncovered evidence of serious ethical violations. Lucas Reynolds has entered into a fraudulent marriage to maintain control of this company, and his so-called wife is nothing but my daughter. Edward's voice cut through the room like a blade. Anna Martinez Reynolds is my daughter, and the rightful heir to Reynolds Enterprises alongside Lucas. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Questions flew, voices raised, papers shuffled. Through it all, Anna remained perfectly still, her hand finding Lucas's under the table. Then James laughed, the sound silencing the room. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. You've just admitted to installing your illegitimate child in a position of power through a fake marriage to her own cousin. The press will have a field day. Half-cousin Anna spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady. And you're right, James. The press will love this story, almost as much as they'll love the story of how you've been embezzling money for years, setting up shell companies, and trying to sabotage the company's value, so you could buy controlling shares at a discount. She nodded to Lucas, who pressed a button on his laptop. The boardroom screen filled with transaction records, emails, and surveillance photos, all documenting James's careful conspiracy. Impossible, James sputtered. You can't prove, actually. Alina stood, moving to stand beside her daughter. I can. I was Edward's personal assistant for years, James. I saw how you operated even then, so I kept records, just in case. When Edward told me his plan to bring Anna into the company, I knew those records might finally be useful. Edward raised his hand, silencing the renewed outbreak of questions. I made many mistakes in my life, sending Alina away, denying Aina her birthright, caring more about appearances than truth. Those mistakes cost me years of happiness. But I won't compound those errors by letting this company fall into the hands of someone who sees it only as a path to personal wealth. He turned to Lucas and Anna. These past months, you've both proven yourselves, not just your business acumen or your investigative skills, but your characters. You found truth in what was meant to be a deception. You chose love over advantage. Love, James scoffed. They're cousins, half-cousins. The entire board corrected automatically, then laughed, breaking the tension. Edward smiled. The law firm of Martinez and Associates has already vetted the legal implications. There are no ethical or legal barriers to their relationship or their joint leadership of this company. He looked at Alina, who nodded in confirmation. She'd been busy since his call the previous night. So, Edward addressed the board. We have a choice. We can embrace scandal and truth, supporting two young people who have already proven their worth to this company. Or we can give in to blackmail and corruption, letting fear of public opinion destroy what 3 generations have built. One by one, the board members voted. The outcome was unanimous, save for James's dissenting vote. As security escorted him from the building, reporters outside began broadcasting the breaking news. Reynolds Enterprises announces new co-CEOs amid family revelations. Later that evening, in Anna's small Brooklyn apartment, Lucas and Anna sat on her worn couch, watching the media frenzy unfold on her tiny TV. Well, Anna said, at least we don't have to pretend anymore. Lucas pulled her closer. I stopped pretending months ago, remember? We should really thank James, Anna mused. Without his corruption, we might never have found our way to the truth. Speaking of truth, Lucas turned to face her, pulling something from his pocket. A familiar contract, now worn and coffee-stained. I think it's time we renegotiated our terms. Anna smiled, taking the paper and tearing it in half. I have only one term now. What's that? No more lies, no more scripts. Just us, figuring this out together. Lucas kissed her, sealing their new agreement. Outside, reporters still clamored for comments, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But here, in this moment, they had found something real in the midst of all their pretense, a truth worth more than any inheritance. Deal, Lucas whispered against her lips. Just us.